Hi, Misha here, and in my A6M Zero videos and other Japanese plane videos, I've mentioned that, well, yes, in 1945 the planes that Japan was flying were hopelessly obsolete. I've mentioned that they knew this, but because of their situation by the time 1944 or 45 rolled around, they really just didn't have the ability to switch to newer fighters like the Allies did. But they had designs. So this time, I'll talk a little bit about the plane that essentially never was, Mitsubishi's A7M. Specifically, this is an A7M2, known as the strong gale or strong wind Reppu in Japanese. And the Allies gave this a code name of SAM, although it never did see combat. And it is very clearly a Mitsubishi naval fighter design, just larger and better than the Zero. Now this here is Witty Wings A6M5, so one of the final variants. And this is a Agostini A7M2. Both are 1/72 scale diecast. And the story here really dates back to before World War II. As early as 1940, the Japanese Navy was looking to the future. The A6M2 was going into service, and Mitsubishi was putting the finishing touches on the A6M2B, and they were thinking about what to do next. They issued a specification, at least loosely, saying the next plane, the A7M, should be faster, have better climb, better dive, heavier armament, just basically be all around better. However, at the end of 1940, beginning of 1941, Mitsubishi was just very busy. They were, like I said, finishing up the M2B. They were starting on the A6M3. They were also developing an interceptor, which would become the J2M, which I have done a video on. They had the Betty bombers, of course, the G4Ms. And on top of that, at this time, in early 1941, Japan just didn't have an engine that was light enough and high performance enough to do what the Navy needed. So, in January, the program was officially suspended. Not canceled, just suspended for a time. And of course, the year would go on, they would get ready for the Pearl Harbor raid. And then in early 1942, the Japanese were enjoying quite a few successes throughout the Pacific, and technology was moving forward. And after the A6M3 went into production, or was preparing to, and the J2M design was finalized in April of 1942, again the Navy approached Mitsubishi and mentioned about needing to get a replacement for the A6M on the way. And in July, they officially issued specifications down to the numbers of what they needed. They wanted it to have essentially a max speed of 400 miles per hour, maybe just shy of, but close enough. They also wanted it to be able to get up to an altitude of 20,000 feet in under 6 minutes. They wanted it to carry, at the very least, two 20mm cannon, plus two 13mm machine guns. And it needed to do all this while having the same maneuverability, range, and all that of the existing A6M. The problem was there was still not an engine available in mid-1942 that could do this. On the drawing board, there was Nakajima's HA45 and Mitsubishi's own HA43. So these were the two choices. And so when they started to design the airframe for the A7M, they pretty much designed it where it could accept either engine with minor modifications. But of course, Japanese fortunes began to turn, first with the Battle of the Coral Sea, which was kind of almost a draw. But then midway, and Japan lost 2/3 of its fleet carriers. Nevertheless, things weren't really doom and gloom yet that year. But by 1943, things were starting to turn. It was kind of a quiet year for naval engagements, though. And with little progress on the Mitsubishi HA43 engine, the Navy ordered them, look, just use the Nakajima. We've already approved it. It's good to go. Mitsubishi had concerns, though, that it could not deliver enough power for the performance. Nevertheless, they did as instructed, fitting the Nakajima engine to the first airframe, making the A7M1, and it flew on May 6, 1944, and was rather disappointing. While the airframe had good handling characteristics, good maneuverability, good turn, speed-wise, it wasn't really anything to write home about. It hit about 350, maybe 355 miles per hour, and that was it. In comparison, earlier versions of the Zero did about 330, but by 1943, newer versions, depending on the configuration, could get up to 350 and in some cases even more. So with this disappointment, at the end of July 1944, the Navy officially canceled the Reppu program. But Mitsubishi asked if they could continue. They had made some headway on their own HA43 engine. And I don't know if I said 43 a second ago. If I did, I meant they used the Nakajima HA45. Can't remember. It's late. I'm tired. Anyway, they wanted to use their own Mitsubishi performance engine, and the Navy gave them a go-ahead to try this. So they fitted another prototype with the HA43 engine. It was ready on October 13th for testing, and this time they had a winner. First they tested it themselves, then they invited the Navy to take a look, and they agreed. And so they reversed their decision, going from canceling the A7M1 to accepting the A7M2, as it was known, and ordering it into full-scale production immediately. And so by November, they were setting up the production line and hoping to have these going to the front line by the end of the year. And what do they have here? It is a larger plane than the A6M. For example, the A6M is about 30 feet long and about 34.5 feet wide. The A7M is just under just over 36 feet long and just under 46 feet wide. Very big wingspan. This was designed for newer carriers like the Tahoe class. Although, yeah, by the time October rolled around. Anyway, that's a story for another day. Glug, glug, glug. The initial speed the Navy wanted was about 398 miles per hour. With the Mitsubishi engine, it still couldn't reach that, but it got up to about 390, which is a very marked improvement. Also, its climb to altitude was quite improved. The Zero over here could get to 20,000 feet in about 7.5 minutes, whereas the A7M could climb to 20,000 feet in just a couple of seconds over 6 minutes. So very close on both of those to meeting the original specifications. The Zero had a max altitude of around 33,000 feet. The A7M could get up to about 35,000 feet, so a small but important improvement. Originally, there were 2 armament packages offered. Now, when it comes to the Zero, there were lots of configurations. By the time you get to the M5s here, they're usually carrying 20mm cannon and 13mm machine guns. And the A7M is no different. It was originally fitted, or planned to be fitted, for 2 20mm cannon, Type 99, and 2 13mm machine guns. However, provisions were also made to have a total of 4 20mm cannon, and the weapons would all be mounted in the wings. And of course, it had fully retracting landing gear, including the tail wheel, or I really should say a positional tail wheel to be exact. It did have more armor protection than previous versions, including some protection for the fuel tanks. Still, of course, a crew of 1. It did have an improved radio, because the Japanese planes had some problems really for a long time in the war with their radios. It was shaping up to be a good plane, on par with Allied things like the P-47, the P-51, the F4U, and the F6F. But unfortunately, for the Japanese, their luck really soured. They lost one of the early prototypes to an accident during testing, which, to be fair, that's just kind of what happens. But then on December 7th, 1944, there was an earthquake in the Nagoya province where these were being assembled, and not only was the factory damaged, it disrupted the supply chain, and so they had to rebuild part of the production line, and materials were slow in getting there. And just as they were getting back on their feet, beginning in March, the Allies started doing major bombing raids in the region. These would destroy 3 more prototypes, plus destroy some of the tooling, jigs, some of the transports bringing supplies to build these, and even some of the drawings and blueprints would be destroyed when some of the office complexes would be hit. So again, another big setback. Nevertheless, work continued, and that summer, the first production model, A7M, came out of the factory, and the Japanese Navy sent a test pilot or 2 over to try them out, and the reports back in June and July were very favorable. The plane was shaping up to have everything they wanted. Speed, altitude, heavy hitting, improved armament, improved armor. It really could have given the Allies a run for their money if it had been, developed in 1942. But at that time, the engine just wasn't available. What can you do? They were also working on a land-based version, because obviously by this point they'd lost all their major fleet carriers and even most of the smaller ones. This would have been known as the A7M3. It used the same HA43 engine, but this would be supercharged. And it was actually able to get up to just about 400 miles per hour, at least theoretically. And it would go from 4 20mm cannons to a standard of 6 20mm cannons. Since it didn't have to worry about operating off carrier decks, they had a little more latitude there. But the prototype for the A7M3 was not quite complete on August 15th when Japan surrendered. And there are arguments as to how many were built. Some sources say 2, some say 3 for the original A7M1. And then as far as the M2, some sources say between 5 and 7 prototypes. Pretty much we know that there was the one production model plus the incomplete M3, around 10. Maybe as few as 8, maybe as many as 11, but we'll go with 10 here for this video. So yeah, they did make them. It wasn't just a drawing board thing, but barely just. And then when the Japanese surrender was formally accepted on September 2nd, 1945, the Reppu project was officially terminated. The airframes were scrapped and all other parts and things were destroyed in compliance, and thus this entered the dustbin of history. I think there might be an incomplete one still somewhere in the world if I remember correctly, but yeah, it never went into combat, which is good for the Allies because it was a damn good plane. At least it had the potential to be. And it's actually amazing that Japan was able to produce this so late in the war and get the resources and the labor, because they were short on everything in 1945. But I thought it was worth mentioning because a lot of people kind of malign the Japanese for sticking with planes like the Ki-43, the Oscar, or the Zero, or the Betty bomber. The fact is, they knew that they were getting outdated, but it's kind of like when you have an old clunker car. You know you should just suck it up, save up the money, and buy a new one. But when you need to get to work with it, sometimes you just have to take it into the shop and get little repairs done. And that's kind of why there were so many versions of the A6M, in especially the late war period, that were only marginally improving things or keeping them around, but they were in that position where they needed it in 2 weeks, not 2 years. Meanwhile, the Allies had the luxury of designs like the Hellcat, and so I think it's interesting. I don't typically go for pure prototype planes, but I actually ended up with this one. Kind of funny story. These Agostini models are primarily in Japan. Some are started to be imported now, but the A7M has not. But I found a seller on eBay that had a couple I'd been looking for, like the D4Y and the B6N. And I emailed him saying I was interested in those, plus the KI-84 and KI-27. And I asked what he could do on the shipping to help out, because if I had bought them all 4 independently, I would have paid like $80 on shipping. And he said, well, if I took 5 planes, he'd do flat rate shipping of $10. And so I looked what he had, and I saw the A7M and thought, oh, that'd be kind of a neat one. So while it wasn't one I was just looking to get, by getting it, I pretty much saved quite a bit of money, and it was nearly a freebie, because these are only about $25 planes. And for what you pay, they're not bad. You get mostly all metal. You get the option of gear up or down. You do get spinning propellers. If I can do it here. you do get canopies with a basic cockpit inside. Nothing fancy, but it's there. The canopies don't open. Although if you really want to put a pilot in, they're easy to just get a thin piece of something soft under it and pop it off. They're just kind of pegged in, and a Hobby Master pilot will fit. And they usually come with removable ordnance, at least when applicable. For example, this one comes with a centerline drop tank. And they come with kind of a neat magazine. Of course, usually in Japanese. This one was in Romanian, so yeah. But God, I just thought it'd be kind of fun. And they're neat little diecast models. These are built on the old IXO tooling, so you might have seen them back then. As for the Witty, probably a little better detail. The Witty planes were pretty heavy-duty, solid metal. They do have a crew figure, but they don't have moving gear. They're just in the down position. Now the wheels do move, rotate, which is nice, but that's about it. And typically the drop tanks and whatnot are glued on place. They're not removable on the Witties, and they cost a little more. I think they're out of production now anyway, but even back when they were in production, they were about $30 to $40, depending on which model it was. So I kind of feel like the Agostinis are a bit of a better value, if you know what I mean. So yeah, thought I'd bring you this one, since there's basically very, very little on the internet about the A7M. Strong wind, strong gale, Reppu. Boy, that sounded bad, didn't it? We'll go with Reppu. Or Sam. Well, if you like Japanese planes, I've done quite a few videos on both World War II and modern jets, so you might check them out. If you have any questions or comments, please post them. And as always, if you could, like, share, and subscribe. This is Misha, and I'll catch you very soon next time.